Okay, guys, so thanks for joining us once more on the CyberJA show, our weekly article review on various articles surrounding topics within the context of cybersecurity and GRC. And for today, we look at the subject of having a mindset or changing mindset among security professionals in how we view or treat with information security. And that's basically what we're looking at, a changing mindset um, from a threat-based approach to security. And just to kind of get things going, I will just be sharing with you um, just a few sentences from the article written by Mari Attar in the Security Weekly article. And for sure, I'm placing a link in our show notes so that you could actually look at the details of this article that we are looking at. And from the article, she says that bad actors find themselves at a constant advantage. They can determine when, where, and how they will attack an enterprise using time and patience to pick the moment they want to strike. And as cybersecurity professional, we constantly find ourselves fighting an uphill battle based on the various growth in uh, closed services, increasing opportunities. Malicious hackers have the advantage of surprise that will only grow as networks become more complex. To name a few, just some of the things that she actually listed in that article. Now, today we seek to discuss a number of questions in relation to the article that we are reviewing, who is, forming in the GRS governance risk compliance space. My good friend who's always here with us to share his expert advice from time to time. So, Chris, welcome. Thanks for joining me again on the CyberJA show.
It's a pleasure to be here. Always happy to chat with you.
Sure, great. And I definitely look forward to having that conversation with you as well. Um, so, Chris, having looked at this article, can you share your perspectives on the article and also to give us an understanding of what we are talking about by having a threat-based approach to security and also
No, I think the author, I think it was Marie, did a very good job in terms of underscoring the fact that the bad actors or the threat actors usually find themselves at an advantage, and that's because they don't play within the rules, so to speak. They don't have a specific framework that they follow. In some cases, ethics are involved. So when as cybersecurity professionals, we're always fighting an uphill battle, right? Whether it's the distributed workforce, the cloud computing, remote workforce, software as a service, whatever it is, your attack surface is consistently and continually changing. And I think she hit it on the head when she said, yes, you must recognize and reconcile the fact that change is continuous, and you have to brace for it. And you cannot attack it from a threat or a compliance-based perspective. You have to look at the overall risk, right, that you're facing, and then manage it that way. The analogy that I thought of as I was reading this article is that of a doctor and a patient. If for example, you go into a doctor and you're sneezing and coughing, and the doctor gives you a napkin or a tissue to wipe your nose, give you some antihistamine, and say go home. That's right. Rather than kind of taking a step back and saying, okay, what is your temperature? Do the basics, right? Check your blood pressure, look at other symptoms, and say what could be causing this. Were you exposed to a specific environment? Whether is this something that has to do with your diet, so on and so forth, right? So the doctor kind of comes in, takes a comprehensive look, and that benign cough is actually right. something much bigger. And if the doctor is uh, forward looking enough, broad enough in her thinking, then she'll be able to, diagnose or do further research to attack whatever that challenge is, right? So I think the analogy, to me, that analogy holds because of the fact that a lot of times when you have a threat based approach to managing your environment, you're kind of like in a game of whack-a-mole rather than taking a step back and saying, what are the risks that we face? And in some cases, a lot of organizations, right, regardless of who they are or what um, vertical they're in, there are different types of risks that organizations face, whether it's strategic, it's financial, it's operational, it's legal, it's reputational. These are all risks that organizations face if they're doing business. So you take a step back and say, what do we need to do to protect our reputation, our revenue, our whatever the risk discipline is, and then you have a holistic approach. It's much easier than saying, okay, there's a vulnerability here. Let's whack this one. Let's get this one. It's more of a strategic approach in terms of looking at your risk, identifying how those risks can impact your revenue, your reputation, your resilience, and regulatory concerns that you may have. So I think I really liked her article. I did have some exceptions in terms of some of the things that she put forth, but I think overall it was a well written article that highlights the importance of having a risk based approach when it comes to managing your business environment.
Okay, sure. Yes. Definitely the article, I mean, definitely is well written in terms of how it actually articulates or defends the point that within the cybersecurity space, then we as professionals seem to have had that previous mindset of having a threat-based approach versus having a risk-based approach. But isn't there some amount of advantage to having both approaches, or is it that it's better to take a risk-based approach than to use a normal threat-based approach? Is it that one has more advantage than the other, or does it depends on the situation, the organization, the environment, the level of threats that exists facing that organization?
No, I think you're absolutely right. In fact, having a risk framework or a risk based approach it's a very mature state, right? So to just come in, you're a new CISO in an organization, or a new risk manager in an organization. We're just going to say, okay, we're going to go to a risk, we're going to leverage a risk framework, and we're going to be off and running. Normally, it doesn't work that way. The reality is, you normally start out with some type of frame. And most organizations, they're usually on a trajectory, right? So what happens is they start with a control framework, something like the NIST 853 or the CIS controls. And from there, you kind of graduate. That's a very specific set of things you're trying to do. So you have a set of controls, you apply those controls, and you're off, right? Next, you have sort of a programmatic framework, something like along the lines of the NIST cybersecurity framework or ISO 27001, right? So now you're kind of looking at your program. Once the program is sort of mature and at a state where it's acceptable to the business, then you can start saying, okay, I'm going to implement a risk framework, something like FAIR or MITRE or NIST 839 or 37, right? Um, that's where you're really starting to get the bang for your buck. The challenge with the risk approach or the risk framework, right? Applying a risk framework, it requires a lot of time and it requires a lot of experience. As we all know, things in cyber are they're fluid, and the workforce is very dynamic, meaning people are either working from home or they're not available at all, or they're in the office, right? So there's a lot of things and ingredients that are required in order for you to get to such a mature state. In some cases, I've seen organizations have both, like you're saying, right? You have sort of a threat, you're a threat-based approach. Uh, that falls under the rubric or within under the hierarchical structure of a risk framework.
Yeah, exactly. Now, when we actually think about it, though, among the security professionals, do you think that this is an approach that is now being accepted? Is this something that is now being implemented within organization in terms of that shift in mindset? Do you think that it is actually happening right now, or is it that there are hindrances based on the fact that they say it's more difficult or challenging to utilize or to implement a risk-based approach to cybersecurity?
So I think it depends on the organization and a number of other variables, right? So, for example, you may have an organization that work in the healthcare sector or in the banking sector, the financial sector. Those organizations tend to be the ones who have more to lose to a criminal, right? Again, whether we talk about their reputation, their revenue, their ability to be resilient, or meeting governmental requirements. So those organizations tend to have the deep pockets and can withstand any type of challenges. They're more able to withstand any type of challenges in terms of standing up a true risk based approach based on one of these, again, like I've mentioned before, the MITRE attack framework, FAIR, ISO 27005, or NIST 839, I believe. So, but if you look at like a small mom and shop or SMB, those organizations tend to do what they can with what they have, right? Unless they're heavily regulated. So I think there are a number of factors driving it. One of the key things that you're starting to see people do are basic things like multi-factor authentication. Well, that's a control, right? That's going to fall under your NIST 853. Um, a lot of organizations have loose capabilities around zero trust, the zero trust framework. So they may have an identity program, but they're unable to effectively have effectively identify their assets. They may have a siloed approach when it comes to like identifying and mitigating vulnerabilities. So it varies across the board. Long story medium, I would say the deeper the pocket, the more painful it is for an organization, the more likely they are to implement a risk framework, a risk-based framework.
Yeah, sure. So I think that is one of the challenges, despite the advantages that are there. It boils back down to the capabilities that exist. Nonetheless, organizations should not shy away from, but to actually look at the benefits or the advantages of using this risk-based approach. Based on the fact that a risk-based approach, when that is taken by the security professionals within an organization, it has a more holistic view of the company in terms of evaluating where its critical assets are, in terms of looking at all those systematically identifying all of those, risk um, assets within the organization and associated versus the threat-based approach that it's almost like an ad hoc situation. Once there is an issue, then you respond. Versus when you have that risk base, it's more systematic, strategic planning, um, anticipating for what can actually take place within the organization, and then putting plans in place to mitigate or to minimize those various scenarios that can take place within an organization. So I definitely think that it's a good way, it's a good approach to be adopted by security professionals within the industry right now. But one of the things I recognize that probably it has always been there, but since recently recognize that the concept and understanding of GRC is even becoming far more forceful today. And cybersecurity professionals are now recognizing that they have to have that holistic approach to cybersecurity. Is no longer a siloed approach whereby everyone is in their own cage, basically. What everyone now has to be working together, IT working along with marketing, not working against. So everyone now has to be thinking about the overall objectives of the organization. What are the risks that can affect us so that we can minimize whatever we do, regardless of your department. It's all about how can we operate efficiently in light of the risks to ensure that we have the essential controls, whatever those controls are, administrative, technical, you name it, in place to safeguard against the likelihood of various um, threats along our attack surface, depending on our industry accordingly.
Yeah, I agree. I think GRC continues to play a critical role, right? The governance piece, you have the risk management, the compliance piece, and what I've seen a couple organizations starting to do is they have their cybersecurity organization, but the control framework that they're leveraging within that cybersecurity organization is either aligned or falls under a larger enterprise risk management framework, which, when you think about it, does make sense, right? You've always hear people say, well, cyber is, should be an enabler, we should be a revenue protector. And I think more and more CISOs are starting to understand, appreciate, and implement the practice of aligning closely with, right, a risk-based approach, right? So when you talk about risk, not just cyber risk, but you're talking about enterprise risk management, right? Um, so absolutely, GRC, right? You talk about a CISO organization, you're going to have your program management, security, architecture and engineering, data protection, threat detection, threat response, you go on and on and on. But a very mature and robust program is definitely going to have a GRC component, which is critical to ensuring that things are effectively working, uh, and they are working as intended.
Yes, exactly. Totally agree. One of the things recognize too that there is no recognize that there is a revolution within the IT cybersecurity space today that is happening. I mean, based on my recollection back in the day, um, based on experience, I mean, the discussion surrounding risk GRC was not so much on the lips of everyone. When you talk about like risk, it seemed to be something associated with management finance, but it is now becoming a part of the vocabulary among IT cybersecurity professionals. Persons are now understanding more. And it seemed to be on the fact that there has been an increase so much with the COVID situation has definitely changed the landscape with the work at home. So many the threat vectors, the attack, the breaches have escalated, and persons recognize that we are now open to more attack surfaces against organizations. So everyone now has to be on board in terms of how we think, how we do things from a risk-based perspective. It's no longer about just plugging in tools. Because I mean, IT for many persons do not so much talk about cyber or security. It's IT. That's it in many organizations. So that concept of risk and enterprise risk management and seeing IT as an enabler of the business was not so much forthright. So this article definitely does justice to the fact that we have to take things to our next level as information security professionals, to have that mindset that aligns with the governance structure of the organization in helping the organization to achieve its business objectives. So it's no longer a siloed approach, but a risk-based approach to helping the company, organization, whichever it is, with their specific objectives.
You're absolutely right. I think, like you said, COVID was kind of an impetus uh, for many different things in cybersecurity. One is, it changed the way people work, right? Which means the attack surface changed overnight. Literally, companies went from, using the traditional VPN, right, where you just VPN into the office, to uh, a more software defined network approach, right? So now, rather than having, a server inside of your internal network and having someone VPN in from their home, you have a distributed ecosystem where you have SaaS applications. You have people with devices around the world accessing your environment to get to an application to interact with data. What could possibly go wrong in that scenario, right? Um, so I think organizations are taking stock. They are realizing that um, things have changed. We're now operating in the future, right? Where people, you can literally do anything on your cell phone, right? In some cases. So again, having the necessary and proper controls in place to ensure that knowledge workers can carry out their remit in a safe and secure environment is really what we're trying to do. She mentioned in her article about a zero trust framework. That's something that I'm big on. I think it's really what we have to think about. We may do a better job of marketing the concept, but maybe giving it a different name, right? Conditional something, but at its very core, zero trust is something that is critical. And if it's not a part of your framework or it's not a part of your trajectory, right, then you're in for the long haul. You're in for a long fight. Embrace yourself. So
Well, it boils back down to a number of factors. One, well, two main things. One, how it is that you as a cybersecurity leader in the organization is able to sell this concept for it to come across in reality. That's one.
exactly.
And secondly, to have the governance structure support. So it is good to have frameworks, to have all of these controls in place. But I recognize that even with the advent of COVID, I mean, I can actually recall when this occurred while I was working at a particular organization, and I mean, within weeks, I had a friend working at one of those telecommunication companies. They had to go into these banks. I mean, starting to reconfigure their PBX so all workers could be working from home. So persons was using their own personal computers, installing VPN services. There was no time for risk assessment. It was all about functionality. That's all persons cared about, functionality. Until it's almost like a can of worms was actually open with all of the various threats when things begin to happen, the breaches, then persons begin to stop to say, wow, it's almost like persons weren't aware of the levels of um, problems that could actually take place against the organization in terms of reputational damage, in terms of the cost that could incur in terms of data breaches. So that was when the realities of things actually started to face a lot of organizations. And now we recognize that In order for a number of these things, defense in depth, um, having the various controls, I mean, zero trust, all of these require a certain amount of capabilities, meaning the finances, the technical resources, and more so for the powers that be in organizations to understand the language of cyber to an extent and what it is that cybersecurity is trying to achieve so that they are able to equate that with dollars and cents in terms of revenue, return on investment perspective. So it's not a total revolution when she talks about moving to that risk-based approach. It's not easy as it is written, but it's digesting the concept, especially among IT cybersecurity professionals who are known for being the technical persons, not having that business incline understanding of organizations or it is that they make generate revenue from that perspective. So it's a new transformation, and this is something that I think cybersecurity professionals, IT professionals, management should have that total restructure where persons understand each other. Or it is that IT supports the company, or it is that finance support IT, marketing ties back to finance, IT operations. That sort of understanding has to be there for all of these things to actually make sense. And that's why I'm a big person on governance. Building the governance, unless there is proper governance that have the structure that breaks down silos, that have the policies, the procedures, persons understand their responsibilities, creating that culture of understanding within organizations, then you will continue to have that levels of segregation and problems.
Yeah, chaos. Absolutely. You said it.
So
I mean, you summed it up, right? I remember in school I had a professor. He would say, "Do it right or don't do it at all." Do it right the first time. I think governance provides you with a framework with which to do things. So as you were talking about the can of worms, right? How do you manage that, right? Do you have a framework? The can is going to pop open, the worms are going to fall out, but do you have a process in place to one prevent, right, the worms from coming out of the can? And if they do come out of the can, how do you minimize the damage of them going all over the place and wreaking havoc, right? And if they do wreak, so it's kind of like that layered approach to to your governance program. So I am 100% in agreement with you. I think those are all valid points. And without a framework, without a governance, risk, and compliance function within your security organization, you're just up to your whims. You're just fighting fires, and you're running around like a chicken without a head, right? So it's critical. It's a critical part of any robust and effective cybersecurity program.
exactly. Well, that's a very good note to end on. So, guys, thanks for joining us once more in our weekly review on the CyberJA show, looking at, and for sure, we definitely want to have that mindset of moving away from having a threat-based approach to moving into having a risk-based approach. So, with that said, connect with us next week on our CyberJA podcast.
All right.
So,
Cheers,
Chris,
everyone.
a pleasure. Until
All right.
then.